Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me say to you and to the witnesses and the audience, my apologies for coming in a few minutes late. I was on the floor for the farewell address of our colleague, Senator Nelson, and I'm sorry that I was not here at the moment I should have been. Mr. Chairman, thank you for this hearing. It was almost 10 years ago that I held my first hearing as the chairman of the Crime and Drug Subcommittee in this room. The subject of the hearing, the threat to the United States posed by the Mexican drug cartels. 10 years ago, we had that hearing. At this hearing, in March of 2009, I quoted a Justice Department report that concluded Mexican drug cartels are, quote, the greatest organized crime threat to the United States. So here we are 10 years later. How are we doing? Last month, the DEA's 2018 National Drug Threat Assessment concluded that Mexican drug cartels remain the greatest criminal drug threat to the United States. I closed my 2009 hearing by saying we must take action to reduce the demand for illegal drugs in the United States and stem the flow of illegal guns and money to Mexico. Democrats and Republicans must work together to find bipartisan, common-sense solutions to this challenge. Now, today, 10 years later, we are in the midst of a drug epidemic like we've never seen before. In 2017, drug overdoses in the United States killed a record 70,237 people. The deadliest drug we face is fentanyl. Last year, 28,466 overdose deaths involving fentanyl, an increase of more than 45% over the previous year. Much of this fentanyl comes from China through the mails, but fentanyl is also being shipped from China to Mexico before being trafficked across the U.S. border. The DEA has found that the cartels transport the bulk of their illicit goods over the southwest border through legal ports of entry, using passenger vehicles or tractor trailers. Yesterday, we had a hearing in the same room. The Customs and Border Protection Commissioner, Mr. McAleenan, told me directly in October of 2017 that his top priority was to secure the border with more drive-through inspection systems, which he characterized as Z portals. When I asked him what he needed to keep narcotics out of the United States and make us safer, he said technology and personnel. He did not say a wall. According to the Department of Homeland Security, these drive-through inspection systems, which Mr. McAleenan has referred to, examine 98% of all the rail cars passing into the United States, but only 18% of cargo, passenger vehicles, and sea containers combined. 98% of the railroad, 18% of the others. Yet the 2019 President's budget request included only $44 million for these systems. I asked Mr. McAleenan yesterday, what would it take? What do you need to put these portal systems in that basically scan these vehicles as they come through to try to detect contraband, drugs, people being smuggled, drug trafficking, human trafficking? What do you need? He said $300 million. That's a fraction of $5 billion that this president is demanding for the wall. And the administration, sadly, in its budget request, did not ask for any funding for additional customs officers, even though we clearly need more officers to detect drugs at the ports of entry and in international mail. It was about 6 months ago that I got off a plane at O'Hare instead of heading into Chicago, stayed out there at a postal facility and took a look at how we monitor the mail coming into the United States to try and detect drugs that are being sent by mail. And it happens every day. It's a good system, but it's not nearly what it should be, and the people there will tell you that. They work at it, and they catch some of them, but a lot of them are not caught. Instead, what the president is telling us now is we have to shut down our government if he doesn't get $5 billion for a wasteful, ineffective border wall. We need modern drug technology to stop the drug cartels from importing the poison that's killing our kids, not a medieval solution like a wall from sea to shining sea. This is a circle, too. They aren't just exporting drugs into the United States. We are exporting drugs and laundered drug money into Mexico. What have we done to stop the Iron River of guns from the United States that arms Mexican cartels to the teeth? In 2016, the GAO found that 70% of crime guns seized in Mexico, traced through ATF's crime gun tracing program, came from the United States. According to the GAO, and I quote, "Most were purchased legally at gun shows in the United States and then trafficked illegally to Mexico." The federal agencies with jurisdiction over the southern flow of guns, or ATF, which enforces federal gun laws, and ICE, which enforces export laws and investigates traffickers and cartels. Are they doing enough? ATF and ICE have an agreement that governs their coordination on firearms trafficking from the United States to Mexico. But in 2016, the GAO found that there were shortfalls in information sharing and collaboration between ATF and ICE, and that improvement was needed. I'm going to be sending a letter to the General Accounting Office asking them to update their 2016 report and to expand it to look at firearms trafficking to Central American countries. I invite my colleagues to join me. Customs and Border Protection also play a key role here. The GAO found, and I quote, "Customs and Border Protection's outbound mission is to facilitate the movement of legitimate cargo while interdicting the illegal export of weapons and other contraband out of the United States." However, in 2017, a CBP spokesperson said that outbound inspections are only conducted, quote, "when resources permit." Why on earth doesn't this administration request more resources for outbound inspections to stop the export of deadly firearms from the United States to these Mexican cartels? One thing Congress should do is finally prohibit straw purchasing and gun trafficking under federal law. Right now, U.S. Attorney's Office have to prosecute those crimes as paperwork violations, which means most of them won't spend any time doing it at all. I've joined with Senator Leahy and Senator Collins on a bill that would create federal offenses with real teeth for this effort. During my hearing 10 years ago, we heard testimony about the smuggling of bulk cash and laundered money from the United States back to cartels. It's the circle. They export narcotics in the United States. We export guns and laundered money back into these cartels. We wonder why they're so powerful. According to the latest DEA drug threat assessment, the amount of bulk cash seized has been steadily decreasing over the last 8 years. DEA reports that, quote, "large amounts of cash continue to be interdicted along major highway corridors, with the cash typically concealed in hidden vehicle compartments or among legitimate cargo." Again, there would be strong bipartisan support in Congress for more resources for outbound inspections if only the administration put as much priority on this effort as they do on a wall. There is more that Congress can do. In 2013, when Democrats controlled the Senate, we passed bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform. Do you know how much was included in that bill for border security funding? $40 billion. And over 60 senators voted for it. No lack of will when it comes to border security. Sadly, the Republican leaders in the House refused to even consider the bill. Earlier this year, we tried again. After we got the report from Mr. McAleenan and others, I worked with my colleagues on a bipartisan immigration agreement to include the border security provisions he'd asked for, increasing the funding for the Z portal scanning devices, port of entry infrastructure and personnel, funding for biometric entry and exit screening. On February 15th, a bipartisan majority of the Senate supported our agreement with this border security included, but it failed to reach the 60 votes it needed because the president opposed it. On the same day, a bipartisan supermajority of the Senate rejected the president's alternative bill. We've got to be honest about the challenges we face and smart about the way we use our resources to address them. I'll work with colleagues on both sides of the aisle to reform our broken immigration system and improve security. Reducing brutal cartel violence and smuggling will not be accomplished by a border wall or punishing innocent victims of cartel violence who are desperately seeking safety in the United States. We have to work to address the drug epidemic in our nation, stop the weapons and cash that flow south to cartels, and collaborate more effectively with regional nations to strengthen their economies and decrease cartel violence. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.